Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a special edition of the Public Works Podcast. I'm here with my dear friend, my best friend forever, Shane Silsby, and he is the CEO and founder at Silsby Strategic Advisors. We're going to talk about his book. I mean, it's nothing better than when somebody says, you know what, I'm going to take all my experience in this beautiful industry and put it in something that we can easily consume in a day or two. We're going to talk about his book, Managing for Meteors, but we're first going to dive into a little bit about Shane and why he's, I guess, validated enough to write a book on our industry. So, Shane, give us a little bit of backstory, who you are, your journey through the public works industry, and then we'll start talking about the book.
Certainly, Joe, and thanks for having me. Appreciate everything you do in the world of public works and helping agencies with training and management advances or retreats. It's part of which is one of the chapters of my books, and you do a great job on that. So thanks for your efforts in the public works industry and for having this podcast. So why am I an authority to write a book on this and what is Managing for Meteors? Well, 20 years in the government sector across the country, Michigan, Arizona, California, cities, counties, leadership positions. My last executive position was in the County of Orange as the Public Works Director in Southern California. And then I went to the private sector at the time of the pandemic. I didn't predict the pandemic, but went in the private sector, had executive level leadership positions there. And then really wanted to focus more on helping local governments, which is where my passion is. And that led me to opening up my own business, starting my own firm. And so in part of helping local governments and seeing what's happening in the workforce with generational shifts and some experience levels shifting, I wanted to offer some lessons learned and some perspectives and some strategies that were successful at cities and counties that I've worked at. By the way, City of Phoenix, fifth largest city, County of Orange, sixth largest county in the country. We implemented some things that were, pretty difficult, but had effectiveness and had good results. So I packaged kind of all of that. The book is about a third of my experience in Arizona, a third of my experience in California, and about a third of my experience across the country and in the private sector. And so that's it. You got 20 years plus packed in to a book, plus what I've taken from the private sector to try to help from the private aid to the public side. And it's really aimed at local governments. And Managing for Meteors is just a metaphor about getting your agency prepared so that when that thing hits, you've set up your structure, you're robust, you're ready to go. And if that meteor never hits you, then you just have a better organization, more efficient, more effective, and you can build your credibility. So that's the high level, Joe.
Yeah, I love the I guess the simile, the metaphor, the meteor, preparing for when it can hit. And if it doesn't, you're just a better operator. You have better systems, you have better procedures, you're in better position for anything if you're prepared for that meteor to hit. I was privileged and blessed enough to get an author's copy of the book. So I read through about half of it so far. An excerpt I pulled from it already is, even a meteor with positive intentions can create stress and additional expectations for you. More money for your department, moving to a new building, getting a motivator leader, all will have an impact. So let's talk about meteors. Like the one that I love is getting a motivated leader. You know how it is. You're in a position and then they hire somebody from outside. He comes in, got a ton of energy, trying to change everything. That can be a huge meteor to your earth. What are your thoughts on managing that and that type of meteor?
Yeah, great point. I kind of did that. I kind of was that meteor a little bit at the County of Orange, trying to be respectful of the structure that was in place when I came to that organization, but also trying to move things forward into some updated practices and focusing on some efficiencies, customer service, culture, things like that. But what we see nowadays, especially with positions that are affected by politics or elected officials, like at the city manager level, many of those positions are only lasting about 3 years for those tenures. And so you can end up with a new leader every 3 or 5 or 6 years for your whole organization. And, agencies want to hire the best person they can. And that person is probably going to say, I have a 100-day plan, or I have a 60-day plan, or I have a 6-month plan. And so they're going to try to demonstrate energy and action, especially in those early phases of their tenure. And that's going to be a meteor. for you. And so how are you prepared to deal with that when they look at your organization as part of the larger organization? How do you come across for your grading? Do you come across as very efficient, effective, customer service focused, good culture, good morale? Or do you come across as an agency that needs work? And neither case is necessarily right or wrong. It's just a point in the time in the journey of an organization. And so what I'm hoping to do with the book and with helping people, and like what you try to do, is try to move people along that journey a little bit, give them help, give them assistance, get them ready to go.
Sure, sure. I like that. Another excerpt I pulled from it says, for many, including this author, the lesson of hard work was learned through athletics. Thankfully, the joy of high school sports was followed by the opportunity to play basketball at the college level for a couple of years. Athletics is the ultimate meritocracy. And you and I both know that some people think government jobs isn't really a meritocracy. It's more so you get in and it's so hard to, get rid of somebody. And you can kind of and I've heard jokes, people say, oh, go to work for the city if you don't want to work. So what's your rebuttal? What's your thought on, if you're within a government organization and you feel like your coworkers aren't pulling their weight, or you're the one that's the superstar in the group project and they're not doing anything, how to manage that potential meteor?
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. And, I've got to say, I've obviously worked alongside or for people in the private and public sectors, and public sector employees that are passionate about what they do are the hardest workers that I've ever experienced, because the clock doesn't stop in some cases, right? You think, okay, it stops at 5, but the residents of your community, that emergency situation, that project, that grant deadline, whatever it is, that doesn't stop. And so, especially for leaders in local government, there can be a 24/7 pressure that never goes away. Unlike some positions in the private sector where, okay, when the business is closed down, you can kind of close down too. If you got a project you're working on, obviously you're going to keep working to get that done. And so it's a different level of pressure and stress for local government agencies that sometimes doesn't go away. And so when you get somebody on your team that might not be as passionate about what you're trying to achieve, that can be a bit of a detractor, because we all know local governments are not going to get paid the most. It's taxpayer funded or another public source of funding. And so there's a market for that. And it's kind of a spreading the peanut butter approach when it comes to payment. And so everybody can be paid roughly the same in their classifications or categories, but then you expect a higher level of performance, even though you're getting the same payment. So that can create an issue financially. So that's why you're dealing with people that are just built differently, that succeed the best in local government, that are just passionate about it. And so those detractors you're talking about can be a challenge. And so you've got to find a way to motivate those folks. You've got to find the right seat on the bus for those folks, to use another metaphor. And, everybody has potential. But if you don't set expectations for people, in one of the chapters in my book, we talk about setting SMART goals with supporting objectives and KPIs, and all those things are built to give people a structure, to have an idea of what the expectations are for them, and to hold them accountable, and to grade performance, right? And if you don't have that in place as a leader, and you want to blame employees for not performing, maybe that's where you need to look in the mirror. And so, that's why I focused one of the chapters on that, is trying to set things in place to help even those employees that might seem marginal without direction, to give them direction, or give them a pathway to maybe another career, another agency where they might fit better.
Gotcha. Speaking of direction, who did you model your play style after in basketball? Like, if you were to name somebody in the NBA, who did Shane play like?
Well, that's interesting. I played for a smaller school in Indiana, and I was coming from Michigan. So I started kind of like after the Bad Boys and the Pistons, and I was a little bit more foul prone, a little bit more aggressive, which didn't necessarily serve me well, because I only played for a couple of years. But that was kind of where I started from, and try to make a name for myself there on the court.
Sure. How often do you get out there now and play some pickup basketball?
Only with my boys. I've got 2 teenage sons, and so I try to keep them motivated on the court. So I'm usually out there just rebounding for them and working on their shooting.
There you go. Love it. The built-in rebounder. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
It's
right.
all I'm good for
So
now, Joe.
yeah, yeah. So next excerpt I found was, if people know and understand the why behind your efforts to improve or update the organization, they may be less likely to oppose recommended changes and may even become supporters. So navigating that, hey, people don't like change type mantra, that, that postulate of you're coming in, you want to shake things up, you want to get people going in the right direction. And sometimes people just want to do what they've been doing for the last 10 years. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Simon Sinek talks about the why, the golden circle, the why, the how, the what. But really, that's important when you're trying to do big, complicated, difficult initiatives, change culture, because there's always a reason. When you wake up in the morning, a reason not to do something. I don't want to get exercise in today. I don't want to eat breakfast, whatever it is. There's always a reason not to do something. And so for somebody else to try to give you a reason to do something, that can even be less motivating. So the why then tries to deal with, how do I, as an employee or as a piece of or a part of the organization, tie into the alignment or the vision of what we're trying to achieve. And it has to be somewhat personal to those folks in order to get them motivated, or at least to understand the perspective, right? So, for example, Orange County, we talk about trying to be more efficient with our financial standing, creating some savings, doing things in a more effective way. Well, why would I want to do that as an employee, right? What's in it for me? Well, one of the things I did through an anonymous survey is I gathered information about what the employees were wanting to achieve, or things they wanted to do. And some of the things that came across were, we wanted to have more training. We wanted to be able to go to conferences. We wanted better technology. We wanted better building conditions because it was outdated. Well, all of that takes money. So if we are more efficient and effective over here at some of the things we can control, then we could maybe free up dollars to do things that were better, or meeting some of the requests of the employees. Because if you ask a question and say, what do you want to do, Joe? And you say, I want to go to Hawaii. And I say, well, that's great. Good luck getting there. How effective is that? I mean, why are you going to trust me to ask any questions later on or try to help you with something? But if I say, okay, you want to get to Hawaii, let's figure out how to get some travel plans in. Let's find some money. Let's figure this out. Let's get you some swim trunks, whatever it is, get you ready, and then get you there. Now that's how you can build trust and credibility in an organization. Listen, put an action plan in place, get vision, describe the why, execute, report on those action items, and then let people know that when they give feedback, they get on a board or get aligned with the vision, that you're going to try to do your best to deliver and produce results.
Sure. One thing I picked out of there was the anonymous survey. So I'm a fan of feedback, and sometimes it can be done right and it can be done wrong. I'm sure you thought, when you're putting together that survey, like, should I really be asking these questions? Because I might be a little scared of the answers that I might get back. But you said, you know what? I'm going to put my ego aside. I'm going to put the survey out and see what we can do to help them, help us, and help everybody have a smoother work environment. Because we get emails upon emails of, how was your stay? How was this experience? And then you buy a product. How was it going? And a lot of times we don't fill them out. So give us your best practices to putting a survey together, making sure their questions are right and that they're worded right, so you get the best answers. And then also not feeling crushed when you get that information back that you might not want, and then moving forward on it, letting them know that they've been heard and that you're taking action on their suggestions.
Yeah, that could be difficult. And I'm sure there's plenty of, agencies or support that would help write the questions in a way. But when you're doing it as a leader and people know it's coming from you, it can get pretty personal, right? People will say things in responses that they're not saying your name, but right? And so you got to try to put that behind you. And what's interesting about that is, in anonymous is the way to go always, because you have to develop trust before you can rely on it. I had people talk to me that, I try to do a survey about every 3 years in leadership positions. And I had some people tell me, when I first did that survey, I was pretty hard. I wasn't trusting. I might have said some things, but then the second survey, 3 years later, it was a bit of a different response. People said, look, I didn't understand kind of what was going on. Now I see it. right? And part of that trust building I use from a data standpoint, that when I did my first survey, coming in just within the first couple of months at Orange County Public Works, we had about a 33% response rate, which is not great from what I was trying to achieve. But when you look at people voting in elections, we're lucky to get a 25 response rate. So I said, well, look, we're going to take the input from those people and take action on it. So at least they know that we're listening. The second time we did that 3 years later, after reporting on what we did, taking note of all of the comments, I had a 67% response rate. So it went from 1/3 to 2/3. And so I look at that as building trust and having credibility with folks in the organization, because they spoke, we listened, we listed all the categories of the comments. You collate. So this is where getting good questions is helpful, to your point, because if you don't have great questions, you get pretty open-ended responses. Then you have to kind of categorize and collate those things. And so we tried to do that the best we could, and we reported everything. Even categories that we said, look, this is something we can't address right now, but we heard this, right? But this is something we can address that we heard. And so we focused on taking actions on the things that we could do. I mean, the organization got there over 50 years. We weren't going to fix it in 50 days. So we had to put a plan in place to execute on those.
Sure. Thank you for that. Another excerpt, while you're teeing up that generational chart, I want to read this for you. Additionally, the degrading infrastructure conditions in the U.S. are constant reminders that most of the things that we utilize in the public realm today were built between the 50s and the 70s and were implemented with roughly 50-year design life cycle. That's crazy. So they're supposed to last 50 years, and they were born between the 50s and 70s. So it's about time.
Yeah, you can do the math, right? That most of our infrastructure is going to be deficient, and the ASCE report cards bear that out, right? We're at a D+ last cycle. I think we made it to a C-. That prompted the bipartisan infrastructure law bill. So we're investing in it, but we're not adjusting the gas tax, for example. So we're not going to get to an A level, which is how the U.S. was, a world power in the 50s. And so we want to remind folks in the workforce about some of those things, because they frankly weren't there when the mass infrastructure went into place, when all those decisions were made, the why for infrastructure in the U.S. to be a world power. And so I just have the chart up here. I think you can see it, Joe, which talks about, just in the last 20 or 30 years here, we started with 3 generations in the workforce. And I got this from a International City Managers Association conference I went to. I thought it was interesting and struck me. You can see the sources there, but we started with 3 generations, right? The traditionals, the boomers, and then the Gen Xers kind of coming in. And then now, 20 years later, we're up to 5 generations in the workforce, but the people with the most experience, right? The traditionals are almost at 0%, just less than 2%. But you can see on this graph the rise of the millennials, which very smart, motivated, generational workforce, but not having that 20 years of experience to rely on to make certain decisions. And so that's really, in getting back to the book, that's what that was about, to fill in some of that gap, because we want to help our leaders of today make good decisions. And they don't have to look at that experience that we present in the book or with other support sessions and say, that's exactly what we're going to do. But they can at least have that in the realm of possibility to know why or why not they might do that. Operating in the public sector without that is kind of like walking a tightrope without a net. And you may not fall, you may succeed, but if you fall, it can be a rough situation for your agency. So especially smaller local agencies, they may only have one swing at it, right? They may only get one strike. And if you miss, it can be bad financially, it can be bad culturally, it can be bad from a credibility standpoint in your communities to have failures. So my goal, and I think yours too, Joe, is to help people, get information, support them, and to help them make the best decisions they can. And as the chart shows, millennials being the largest portion of the workforce, we're trying to help people that just don't have that built-in experience of the 20 years of build in the U.S. economy in the infrastructure arena.
Sure. When and looking at the chart, it kind of makes it easy for you to see kind of the the crossing or the passing off or the handing over of the majority of the guard. When do you think it's optimal to, I guess, attack it or put it on your to-do list for the year or put it in your plan? Should it be as soon as it intersects? Should it be like, 5 years before, let's say, the boomers are hitting that age of retirement? Should the Gen Xers, should they be involved, or should it just be only millennials and boomers? Like, what are your thoughts on when you should attack this?
Yeah, I think today, I mean, attack it today because every day we've got more people retiring from the workforce with a built up knowledge base and expertise base. And look, not everybody's an A+ performer, but everybody has experience, right? And so every day we have the most experienced people in the workforce leaving. And then every day we have people with the least amount of experience entering the workforce. And so you have to start today. And some of this gets into ongoing training, which I know you do some of, and workforce development and creating good policies and procedures and good cultural approaches and take advantage of that experience. But if you don't have that available in your organization, you lose a lot of that, which is what happens with the silver tsunami we've been talking about, with the pandemic, which accelerated a lot of that, with people's maybe less than desirable approach to working for government agencies when the private sector can be very lucrative. That's where we want them to start thinking and putting those things in place. But if you don't have that in your organization, that's when we hopefully will invite you to work with people in the private sector now that may have some of that. And the term I give that is fractional government executive. So you might have heard about a fractional executive in the private sector. That means somebody's actually doing a fraction of a CEO or a fraction of a CFO work for multiple organizations. In the public sector, you can't really do that. You cannot outsource leadership, but you can rely on people that have that experience to help with specific initiatives, projects, approaches, and analyses to support those leaders that cannot be replaced by somebody just in the private sector. So that's why I'm trying to help out from a fractional government executive standpoint.
Yeah, and I guess in line with Meteors, whenever I watch those doomsday movies of like a meteor's gonna come and it's gonna hit Earth, they kind of always tell about like the damage it could potentially do. Like, it's gonna be a meteor the size of Arkansas, and it's gonna hit in the Pacific, and it's gonna send a tidal wave that will like cover all the way through Nevada, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the damage of a meteor, of like you talked about failing at this? You fail, like
Yeah.
I said, OC saying you fail at handing off that information on it. Let's say at a director manager level, you fail at that. You have some new guys in, they don't know anything because the old guard left and they didn't pass off that knowledge. What's the worst that can happen in that situation?
Yeah, I think one of the worst things is you can lose credibility for your organization. And that comes with financial penalties. You don't get your budgets approved. That comes with community distrust. So you don't get projects executed correctly that can improve the community. But if you have a bad reputation, bad credibility, even a good project may not be able to get funded or get implemented. And so that's probably the worst thing. And while, the meteor, the metaphor for that can seem negative or can seem a bit doomsday, think about what happens in those movies, Joe, when the meteor's coming, right? What happens? People put aside their kind of the petty differences or what's going on in their daily lives, and they come together, right, to try to take on this big thing. Different countries, people are, we got to figure this out. Give me the best and brightest. Let's get together on this. So, one of the sayings I always loved in the government space was never let a good emergency go to waste. And so if things are happening, which is generating some of that energy and some of that collaboration, you can take that negative issue and harness it to create a positive change or a positive shift for effectiveness, efficiency, cultural improvement by using that kind of oncoming issue.
Gosh, you're so right, because when what do they say in war, that if the soldiers don't have a common enemy, they start to fight themselves.
Yeah.
And even my daughter, she's 2 years old. She likes Paw Patrol, and the new Paw Patrol movie came out, and the premise is of meteors coming to Earth or to I
Yeah.
forgot, uh, the city that they're at, and it's going to do damage. So literally, all the dogs banded together and put their differences aside, and they stopped the meteor from coming. And like the weakest dog made the biggest difference, and she became a star after doing that. So yeah, the analogy of, I totally get it when somebody steps up and says, you know what, there's a meteor coming. We're gonna do these couple of things to help alleviate that, to make sure the damage is minimal. That's a big deal. So let's talk about kind of your writing process behind the book. I'm sure a lot of people, they're like, man, I want to write a book, but I just can't figure it out. So give us the, you don't have to go into too much detail, but like, how did you find time to sit down and crank your pages out? What was the editing process like? And then, how was it?
Yeah, it was difficult. You know, writing a story probably is difficult to be creative and all those things, but in some ways for me that would be easier because it doesn't have to be accurate, right? It doesn't have to be technically proficient. It just is a story. You read it, you like it, you don't like it, whatever. But when you're writing something that's aimed at local governments to be used kind of in the public realm, it's a bit more difficult because I worked with a ghostwriter on the topics and some of the content to try to make it maybe a little bit more enjoyable or get to a broader audience of reader. But then I had to go back through and re-edit the whole thing to make it technically accurate, precise, right, and make it effective in its communication of what it's trying to do. Because if somebody reads a chapter, and the book is built like a toolbox, right? You can go to any chapter. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can go to any chapter and deal with that topic, learn a little bit about that topic. And so if somebody's going to use it like a toolbox, I want to make sure those tools are effective. And so I don't know if other authors had this experience, but I had to go back and kind of re-edit and not completely rewrite, but do a lot of, take a lot of energy onto that phase. So that took about, all in, it's going to be probably a year and a half by the time we get fully launched. And where do I find time for that? Well, that's one of the, I think, blessings I've had with having a really rewarding career in the public sector. On the private side, now I could kind of organize my schedule in a way to address things that I needed to do for the business side, but also, think and put time and effort into creating the chapters, the structure, the content, the exhibits of the book.
In the same line with basketball, you know how it is. You show up to the gym, your high school, college, you have your team, you have your set practices, you have your set outside of practice meetings, you have your weightlifting sessions and all that. What was the kind of the pace or the tempo? Was it like every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're working on cranking out 20 pages? Was it, every Tuesday and Thursday you're working on editing? How was that tempo or just that daily regimen, that grind over the year and a half of putting the book together?
Yeah, it was kind of, a couple times a week after the work day was kind of over at night, going through all the content and trying to get it organized. Figuring out the structure was the first thing, just kind of how to make the book flow. Working on kind of the intro and the conclusions to hopefully give it a little bit of interest. That was a different thing than kind of the central chapters, which are more direct toolboxes. So the challenge is when you get into some of the content or a chapter, you don't want to go halfway because you've got to flow. So you've got to dedicate hours at a time, to get through some of that. And so, yeah, it just takes a constant effort, and then it's back and forth. So you're doing your markups, you're sending it through to a different editor, proofreader, coming back to you to make sure it's correct. So, yeah, a lot of back and forth, a lot of time, a lot of turning the screws. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In closing, let's say you get this book out to the masses. What would be the I guess the sweetest or the most impactful like comment that you would want to receive back from it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be that, we took a look at some of the content, we used it as a toolbox, we improved our organization, and this thing happened, right? We had better culture. We we're able to get our finances in a place where we could deliver that project that we couldn't before. We did an alternate delivery the way we approached the project, and therefore we didn't have a bunch of change orders. We came in on budget, on schedule. Our agency has better credibility now when we go to the community. We're a trusted agency, not one that's looked at with distrust. So any of those would be great. I'd also love for somebody to say it's not boring. That'd be great, because it's a bit of a technical document, but it's meant to really be, a isolated chapter, access as you need, toolbox. And I just wanted to put that out in the world to try to help local government leaders, because as I worked with people across the country now on the private side, which is something I get to do, which I didn't necessarily get to do on the public side, I'm seeing a consistent theme in the things we talked about already generationally and the experience levels. And so I was trying to put that in there to try to at least help offer some options.
Sure. All right. How can more people find out when the book is coming out? And then also, how can people reach out or find more about Silsby Strategic Advisors?
Yeah, thanks for that, Joe. And thanks for your time today. You do a great job as always. The book will be available on Amazon.com. Just type in Managing for Meteors, should get you there. Or you can reach out to me through my website, which is silsby-sa.com. Or search Silsby Strategic Advisors, and there'll be a link on there to access the book. Or if you want to talk to me, you can go to the website, or you can just send me an email, shane@silsby-sa.com.
Love it. Shane, anything you wish I would have asked you before we get out of here?
I don't think so. Just I wish you would just tell me your secret sauce for doing such a great job on the Public Works podcast and getting to work with all kinds of exciting and interesting guests.
Stop it, man. It's just reps and sets, man. Sometimes you just got to get in the gym and get your 3 sets of 10 in.
Yeah, that's good. Well,
that's it.
Thanks.
All right, man. Yeah, thank you for hopping on the show. All the listeners out there, look out for the book. This will probably be coming out maybe a week before or 2 weeks before the book actually releases. So get the book, use it as a stocking stuffer for Christmas next year, or give it to your boss. It's not wouldn't be disrespectful if you handed it to your boss and slipped it on their desk. Oh, Shane, any final words?
Yeah, sharing is caring. So if you read it, you absorbed everything, give it to somebody else you think could be helpful. If not, just call me up and say, Shane, I read a little bit, but tell me more. We'll get together. We'll do a partnership with Joe Blackman and get you all figured out for your agency.
Love it. Shane, thank you for hopping on the special edition of the Public Works podcast. And thank you all listeners for tuning in.
Thanks, Joe.